English August, An Indian Story by Upamanyu Chatterjee. Through the windshield they watched the wide silent road, so well lit and dead. New Delhi, 1 in the morning, a stray dog flashed across the road, sensing prey. "So, when shall we meet again?" asked Dhruvo for the 8th time in 1 hour. Not that partying was too agonizing and that he couldn't bear to leave the car, but that marijuana caused acute lethargy. Said Agastya and paused, for the same reason. Dhruvo put the day's 43rd cigarette to his lips and seemed to take very long to find his matchbox. His languorous attempts to light a match became frenzied before he succeeded. Watching him, Agastya laughed silently. Dhruvo exhaled richly out of the window and said, "I have a feeling, August, you're going to get hazar-fucked in Madna." Agastya had just joined the Indian Administrative Service and was going for a year's training in district administration to a small district town called Madna. "Amazing mix, the English we speak. Hazar-fucked, Urdu and American." Agastya laughed. 1,000 fucked, really fucked. I'm sure nowhere else could languages be mixed and spoken with such ease. The slurred sounds of the comfortable tiredness of intoxication. "You look hazar-fucked, Marmaduke, dear." "Yes, Dorothea, I'm afraid I do feel hazar-fucked. See, doesn't work. And our ancestors are Indian. And our accents are Indian, but we prefer August to Agastya. When I say our accents, I, of course, exclude yours, which is unique in its fucked mongrelness. You even say, 'Have a nice day' to those horny women at your telephones when you pass by with your briefcase, and when you agree with your horrendous boss, which is all the time, you say, 'Yeah, great,' and 'uh-huh.'" "Don't talk shit," Dhruvo said, and then added in Bengali, "You're hurt about your mother tongue," and started laughing, an exhilarated volley. That was a 10-year-old joke from their school days in Darjeeling, when they had been envious of some of the Anglo-Indian boys who spoke and behaved differently, and did alarmingly badly in exams and didn't seem to mind. They were the ones who were always with the Tibetan girls and claimed to know all about sex. On an early summer afternoon, in the small footfield among the hills, with an immaculate sky and the cake-like white and brownness of Kachanjunga, Agastya and Prashant had been watching. Agastya disliked football and Prashant disliked games, the usual showing off with the ball, shout in the air from the Anglos, which increased whenever any Tibetan female groups passed the field, echoing like a distant memory. "Pass it here, man. This way, man. You can't shoot. Your foot's made of turd on what, man?" Agastya had never heard any Anglo say man. He and Prashant had been lazily cynical about those who shouted the most and whose faces also contorted with a secret panic in the rare moments when the ball did reach them. Then some Tibetan girls had come together and taken out a fucking guitar. "The Tibs and the Anglos always have guitars," Prashant had said. Football had been abandoned, then laughter and twanging. "It's the color of the Anglo and Tib thighs," Prashant had said. "Not like us." Agastya's envy had then blurted out. He wished he had been Anglo-Indian, that he had Keith or Alan for a name, that he spoke English with their accent. From that day, his friends had more new names for him. He became the school's last Englishman, or just "Hey English." His friends meant "Hey Anglo," but didn't dare, and sometimes even "Hello Mother Tongue." Illogical and whimsical, but winsome choices, like most names selected by contemporaries. And like most names, they had paled with the passage of time and place, all but August. But they yet retained with them the knack of bobbing up out of some abyss on an unexpected occasion, and nudging a chunk or two of his past. A truck roared by, shattering the dark. Out there in Madna, quite a few people are going to ask you what you're doing in the administrative service. Because you don't look the role. You look like a porn film actor, thin and kinky, the kind who wears a bra. And a bureaucrat ought to be soft and clean shaven, bespectacled, and if a Tamil Brahmin given to rapid quoting of rules, I really think you're going to get hazar fucked. I'd much rather act in a porn film than be a bureaucrat, but I suppose one has to live. Let's smoke a last one, shall we? Said Drupo, picking up the polythene bag from the car seat. In Yale, a PhD wasn't a joke. It meant something. It was significant. Students thought before they enrolled. But here in Delhi, all over India, Drupo threw some loose tobacco out of the window. Education is bidding time, a meaningless accumulation of degrees, BA, MA, then an MPhil, while you join the millions in trying your luck at the civil services exam. So many people every year seem to find government service so interesting. He paused to scratch his elbow. I wonder how many people think about where their education is leading them. Yet you returned from Yale, Agastya yawned. But mine is not the typical Indian story. That ends with the Indian living somewhere in the first world, comfortably or uncomfortably, or perhaps coming back to join the Indian administrative service, if lucky. You're wrong about education, though. Most must be like with me, with no special aptitude for anything, not even wondering how to manage, not even really thinking. Try your luck with everything. Something hopefully will click. There aren't unlimited opportunities in the world. They smoked. Drubo leaned forward to drop loose tobacco from his shirt. Madno was the hottest place in India last year, wasn't it? It will be another world, completely different. Should be quite educative. Drubo handed the smoke to Agastya. Excellent stuff. What you'll do for sex and marijuana in Madna. By the fastest train, Madna was 18 hours away from Delhi, but of course the fastest train simply shrieked its way through it. As the train that did stop at Madna slipped out of New Delhi, Agastya waved to his uncle and then locked himself in the toilet to smoke some more marijuana. His compartment had another traveler for Madna, an engineer in some thermal power station. Desultory train conversation began, and Agastya was soon asked to categorize himself. Agastya? What kind of name is Agastya? Asked the engineer, almost irritably. He was a large, unpleasant man, the owner of a trunk that wouldn't fit below the lower berths, but on which he wouldn't allow anyone to place his feet. He's a saint of the forest in the Ramayana, very ascetic. He gives Ram a bow and arrow. He's there in the Mahabharata too. He crosses the Vindhyas and stops them from growing. The engineer looked dissatisfied, almost suspicious, as though Agastya had just sold him an aphrodisiac. He interrupted Agastya again almost immediately, squeaking with surprise. Excuse me, IAS? You are IAS? You don't look like an IAS officer. He eyed him doubtfully. You don't even look Bengali, pronounced Bengali. Agastya was only half Bengali. His mother had been Goanese, a Catholic. He hardly remembered her. She had died of meningitis when he had been less than 3. He was athlete, thin, and bearded. He had no devouring interest until he came to Madna, very little ambition. Outside the Indian hinterland rushed by, hundreds of kilometers of a familiar yet unknown landscape, seen countless times through train windows but never experienced. His life till then had been profoundly urban, shabby stations of small towns where the train didn't stop, the towns that looked nice from a train window, incurious, patient eyes and weather-beaten bicycles at a level crossing, muddy children and buffalo at Waterhole. To him, these places had been, at best, names out of newspapers where floods and caste wars occurred, and entire Harijan families were murdered, where some prime minister took his helicopter just after a calamity or just before the elections. Now he looked out at this remote world and felt a little unsure. He was going to spend months in a dot in this hinterland. The train was 4 hours late. They reached Madna after dark, a small tube-lit station, stray dogs, a few coolies, a man selling rusks and tea, a family of beggars arguing in unfamiliar tongue around the taps. A sweating, swarthy man came up to him and mumbled something. He smiled and said in Hindi, "Will you speak Hindi, please? I'll take some time to pick up the language." The man smiled, embarrassed, and asked in a harshly accented Hindi, "Are you Mr. Sen, IAS?" In Madna, IAS was always to be attached to his name. It almost became his surname. In the jeep, he realized how stifling it was. "Where am I staying?" he asked. "The government rest house, sir," said the swarthy man from behind. He was a naib tehsildar, he had said. Whatever that was, Agastya had thought, "Accommodation for government officers is a problem in Madna, sir," said the man. For a year, Agastya was to move from one room in a rest house, a suite it was called for some reason, and pronounced suit, to some other room in some other rest house, homelessness of a kind. Glimpses of Madna en route, cigarette and pan dabas, disreputable food stalls, both lit by fierce kerosene lamps, cattle and clanging rickshaws on the road, and the rich sound of trucks and slush from an overflowing drain. He felt as though he was living someone else's life. His education began on the first evening itself. The room at the rest house was big and furnished not like a room, but like a house. It had a bed, a dressing table, a dining table with 4 chairs, a sofa, 2 armchairs, a desk and a chair, 2 small tables, and a beautiful bookshelf. The room looked like the storehouse of a dealer in stolen furniture. "Why all this furniture? I don't need all this." "Sir," with a naib tehsildar, was a great stubbed sullen name. The caretaker cook of the rest house. He spoke Hindi with great reluctance. There were children at the door, in various sizes. All seemed to breathe through their mouths. "What's a sofa doing here?" "For guests, sir." "No, take it away. Far too many things in here. I don't need all this. Can't you remove some?" "Remove some?" They did eventually, their faces and forearms tense with disconcertment. They called others for help. They dragged the bed under the fan. Agastya sweated, directed them in Hindi, and felt the mosquitoes. "Isn't there any insecticide that we can spray?" Vasant, the caretaker cook, looked at him murderously over the back of a sofa. "Yes, sir. Horrible mosquitoes here," smiled the naib tehsildar. They sprayed the room with flit. Vasant brought dinner almost immediately after on a tray. The naib tehsildar hovered at the door, never failing to show something of himself to Agastya, a shoulder, a shoe, a leg, and each portion of his body, saying, "There, I hope you continue to feel uneasy and strange." Dinner was unbelievable. The dal tasted like lukewarm chilled shampoo. The tang of flit in his nostrils. He was awed by the thought of months in which every meal would taste like this. "Is this the usual way you cook?" He finally communicated the question to Vasant through the naib tehsildar. Vasant said yes. Then the Naib Tahsildar said that the collector had told him to tell the cook to boil Augustia's drinking water, as there was endemic jaundice and epidemic cholera in Madna, and that he had already done so, and that may he now take his leave, sir. 10 o'clock. Augustia was on the veranda outside his room. Around the tube light wheeled 100 different insects. The frequent plop of careless lizards falling on the floor. His room was one of two in a kind of cottage. The other room was silent, locked. Other similar cottages, and 200 feet away the large circuit house. A few lights on in the compound, 2 jeeps outside the circuit house. He was 1,400 kilometers away from Delhi and more than 1,000 from Calcutta, the 2 cities of his past. Before going to bed, he lit an anti-mosquito incense stick under the table and rubbed mosquito repellent cream all over himself. He slept under a mosquito net, but the mosquitoes got him anyway. He surfaced, struggling out of sleep thrice that night, only to hear the mosquitoes droning in the glow from the veranda. On his first morning in Madna, he woke up feeling terrible, feeling fucked, he later wrote to Neera in Calcutta, like the fallen atom. He found opening his eyes difficult, then realized that the mosquitoes had reached his eyelids too. Some start to the day. He looked at the wooden ceiling and said to himself, if your very first emotion of the morning is disgust. He looked at the mirror, 2 red swollen spots on his right cheek above the beard, one below his left ear. Calcutta's mosquitoes seemed more civilized. They never touched the face. This place has drawn first blood, he thought. Wasn't elephantitis incurable? He stepped out to ask Vasant for some tea. Beyond the veranda, the other buildings were turning white with the glare. The sun seemed to char his head and neck. 8:15 in the morning, and he could almost sense the prickly heat spring up on his skin. And yet this was late summer. The year before Madna had topped the charts, as it were, had been the hottest place in India. It had a few traditional rivals in the Indian Deccan, but every year, Madna's residents were almost always sure that their town and district would be hotter than those. In salutation, and to be fair, to avoid sunstroke, the residents tied a towel or a napkin over their ears and head at 8 in the morning and took it off after sundown. Later he tied one too, quite enjoying himself, even getting himself photographed in his hood. And later still, he would think that those who saw menace in an Indian summer and called the sun angry and pitiless and enervating, and words like that, merely reduced the sun to a petty anthropomorphic jumbo. Of course, the heat did weaken the calves and dehydrate the head, but the sun, like so many things in Madna, was educative. It taught him the aphorisms of common sense. Don't fight the process of nature, it seemed to say. Here, stay indoors as much as you can. If possible, turn nocturnal. The world outside is not worth journeying out for, and beauty out of door is visible only in the dark or in the half light of dawn. If Madna had been Delhi and the weather less hot, and if he'd woken up earlier, he would have gone for his run. He had been a competent long-distance runner in his college days. Running seemed to clear his mind and start the day well, but he returned to his room and wondered if he should smoke a joint. After all, the jeep wouldn't come for him till 11. While wondering, he made one and smoked it anyway. Then he put the Tagore's Shyama on his cassette recorder and lay down to contemplate the room. He had to get organized, unpack properly, and think a little, maybe smoke less because there was something dangerous in smoking alone and in an unknown place. The room was at least big. He liked that. High up on the wall facing him, amid the lizards, hung what he would later call the usual improbable rest house painting, a sunset and water, and therefore 2 sunsets, a boat a boatman in a Japanese conical hat, and the shore two trees like giant mushrooms. As he went higher, he relaxed more and grew more amazed in an objective way at the absence of imagination in the painting. He tried to visualize the painter and couldn't. He thought, had the painter been brushing his teeth or bending over trying to get his cock in his mouth, or what, when he painted this one? There wasn't a single thought behind a single brush stroke. Irritated, he got up, climbed a chair, and took down the painting. At the back, beneath the cobwebs and dust of years, he read in ink turned brown, donated to the Madness Circuit House, my unwanted second home, by me, R. Tamsi, Deputy Engineer, Public Works Division, 4th July 1962. Below this was a tremendous poem, again in brown. Away from my old life and my spouse, so many days at this circuit house. Away from Goa, my dear home. On office work I have to roam. Now the painting looked different, and a little less ridiculous. This was the Goa of an imagination forlorn, not perhaps accustomed to creativity, but compelled to it by isolation. Suddenly Agastya thought he could see Tamsi better. He would be short, plump, but not worried at all about his weight, and therefore very slightly complacent, gentle, and not quite relaxed in the company of people like Agastya. In a room and place like this, certainly not given to marijuana or inventive masturbation or hunting for sex, Tamsi, what would he have done? Perhaps many had convinced him that he painted and wrote well. His father might have said, in the language of proud fathers, "You must always have these as a second string to your bow." Tamsi had been lonely but had not given in, had recreated in his wilderness an image of home. Perhaps those mushroom trees and sunsets were a view from his window. Perhaps boatmen really did wear Japanese conical hats in Goa. He turned the painting over and over, relating the brush strokes to the poem. He liked my old life and my spouse. At least Tamsi admitted to missing his wife. Some others would have been shy of this. He was sentimental too, otherwise he would not have donated the painting. Despite the nullity of talent, it was still an attempt to share a mood and an experience. He smiled at the blue walls and thought, they just might grow on me too. A rapid but timid knock on the door, like the scurrying of some rodent. A small black man in the white khadi of a peon. He was a Digambar, the peon attached to Agastya for his stay. "Here," said Agastya, "just clean this painting and put it back." At 11, still stoned, he went to the collectorate to meet R.N. Shrivastava, IAS, collector and district magistrate of Madna, his mentor and boss for the months of training.